Clock hour. Mike Craven, the senior writer for Dave Campbell's Texas Football Magazine. I put this up. It's got the blue tape on it. It says studio, like it's going to leave here. With Sonny Dykes, of course, on the cover after the year that TCU had. And Mike Craven's the senior writer, wrote quite a bit, a lot of stories and features. And he joins us now. Craig Smoak, David Smoak on 365 Sports. Mike, first of all, I think I knew you when you first got into the business. You've kind of become one of those red-hot prospects that's made it, aren't you?
I'll take it. I mean, sure. I had some bumps in the road there in the middle of my own self-doing and kind of righted the ship. The Austin American Statesman kind of let me revive my career a little bit. Hired me on in 2016 or so, and then Dave Campbell came calling, and it's been a great job. I got a really, really cool gig.
Well, no, it really is, and it's such a popular. Everyone's heard this. It's the Bible of Texas football, high school and college football. So it's great to have you on the show. So you've written a lot of features. I think one of them was it the talent, who has the best or most talented rosters among the college teams in Texas?
Yeah, I just put that one out today. It's summer, so we're kind of doing the listicle thing, right? Ranking all the things that we can think of ranking and just trying to kill as much time, get as many clicks before we get to media days when it really gets rocking and rolling again.
So, Mike, Sonny Dykes on the cover. I mean, I feel like you guys probably had some discussions, but that seems about as much of a no-brainer as possible given the year TCU had, given Sonny's Texas ties, and I know you explore all of that. But when you're writing a piece like this, a big feature, can you kind of take us into the process and just kind of how the ball gets rolling? And then obviously, connecting with Sonny and being able to discuss with him, various topics and picking his brain and getting this story off the ground.
Yeah, so when we came to the decision to do Sonny on the cover, which as you mentioned, we kind of, as soon as I was headed towards the Fiesta Bowl, I kind of knew that's where we were going. Just when you looked around the landscape of the state, the only other team kind of in contention that had a really good year was probably UTSA. And, we'd already put Jeff Traylor on the cover the year before. They weren't going to, I'm a road runner, but they weren't going to let me do that 2 years in a row. So, Sonny became the guy. And lucky for me, I've done 2 covers now. And one of them was Jeff Traylor, Joey McGuire, and the next one's been Sonny Dykes. And I don't know if I could pick 3 guys in the state that probably care more about our magazine at that level. Nothing against like a Jimbo Fisher, but he's not from here. He doesn't really know the history of the state or whatever those 3 guys do. So he was an open book. He gave me family's phone numbers, talked to his wife, talked to him, talked to his sister, talked to Hal Mummy, and just as many people as I could, Dana Holgerson, just as many people as I could from his kind of coaching circle, coaching tree, and the guys he came up with. And he was a really open book. He gave me quite a bit of time, a couple of different interviews. And, honestly, all these cover stories are 2,500 words. And when you first kind of start thinking about it, you're like, man, that's a long story to write. But then when you kind of do all these interviews, everybody's got an interesting story. If you can go ahead and find it, and 2,500 words becomes really short, really quick, and you leave a lot on the cutting room floor.
Yeah, and I was going to ask you about that. You probably wrote 3 times as long as it was, but just Sonny Dykes, we've had him on this show on 365 Sports when he was even at SMU, and obviously I think 3 or 4 times last year. He's an interesting guy. Seems like somewhat of a laid-back person, but he has fire in that belly, and we've seen that on the sidelines a few times.
What I found interesting doing the story was kind of learning that he rebelled against his father's kind of jovial nature. I kind of grew up hearing Spike Dykes stories as kind of this lovable, big figure, very, jovial and talking and did jokes. And, I think Sonny early in his career kind of repelled against that and kind of went more Mike Leach, Hal Mummy, reserved, kind of keep it close to the vest, make little quirky things here and there, but not be that kind of guy. And when he failed at Cal, it really seemed like he embraced more of that side of his personality, and you kind of see him more, a little bit energetic on the sidelines. His players love him. And so that's kind of what the story became, is kind of how he took the X's and O's of Mike Leach and Hal Mummy, and then the culture building of his father, Spike Dykes, and combined those 2 things into success at SMU and then now at TCU.
Looking back, hindsight being 2020, is it bizarre to think he was the head coach at Cal? I mean, in hindsight, I know the guys go all over the country, but he is just so made for where he is right now, and just like a Jeff Traylor, just like a Joey McGuire, like you mentioned.
Yeah, I think that was another act of rebellion, right? Like he was kind of penciled in as Spike's son as somebody who had to be in the South, somebody who had to be in Texas, and he was in Ruston, Louisiana at Louisiana Tech and won a conference title. And Cal came calling, and in his words, he kind of thought it'd be cool. You know, his kids were, about to start elementary. He was like, man, I can take them to Berkeley. They can be in great schools. It'll be California. It'll be fun. It'll be different than anything we've ever experienced. And, one of the funny things he told me that didn't make it into the story was, when he was at Louisiana Tech, everybody was rude, but they were nice, right? Like they would, you'd get a flat tire, they'd see you on the side of the road, and they'd be like, you dummy, how'd you get this flat tire? Move over, let me change it for you. And then he went to Cal, and everybody was nice, but they weren't polite, where they'd be like, oh, man, that stinks, you got a flat tire, and then they'd continue on driving, right? So, he was just kind of a person out of water at Cal. I think now with enough time, we can kind of look back and go, maybe that was more Cal than Sonny. And then another big part of it is when he got fired at Cal, it's because they weren't playing any defense. They were scoring a lot of points. They beat Texas twice. But he didn't know how to play defense. He didn't know how to get balanced. And in 2017, he was an analyst at TCU, under Gary Patterson to try to figure out how you do defense. And I think that really changed him. I think that year, really kind of changed his football philosophy, kind of opened his eyes a little bit to running the ball and playing defense. And I think since then we've seen a different Sonny. It's not the same air raid, score 50 points a game. And so that's another thing about Sonny is he's been adaptable. He hadn't let the failure define him. And a lot of coaches get so stuck in their ways that they don't ever do that.
You wrote that ranking the most talented college football rosters, and obviously I don't know how it couldn't be either Texas or Texas A&M. With all due respect to any of the success TCU's had, what Tech has back, and what Baylor has also done. Was that an easy 1 and 2, and was there much distance between 1 Texas and 2 A&M?
Not much difference between 1 Texas and 2 Texas A&M, but yeah, I mean, I think it'd probably be easier to do that in tiers. There's kind of the future SEC tier and just what they're able to do from a blue chip ratio. I think they're both 70% or over. There's a pretty big gap between number 2 and probably number 6, and then another little gap between 7 and 9, right? And then another gap between 10 and 13. And so, what's interesting to me is kind of where the Big 12 pecking order is going to be, and it does feel, like it's going to be a fun thing to watch between Texas Tech, TCU, Baylor. Maybe if Houston gets into that mix with some early success, kind of where the recruiting kind of falls. That's kind of my background before I got this gig, and I always kind of keep one eye on kind of where the talent is migrating towards.
Mike Craven, senior writer, Dave Campbell's Texas Football Magazine, with us on 365 Sports.
So, Mike, safe to say that you're not surprised by just kind of bringing all these different elements together. Joey McGuire, they're a team that's being talked about a lot right now, and for good reason. They built up a lot of momentum and just have a lot of energy behind them. Just your thoughts on just seeing kind of this renaissance going on. You got Sonny back at home leading TCU to a playoff. You got Joey McGuire. You mentioned Jeff Traylor. It seems like a lot of good things in the water right now with Texas football, especially at the college level.
Yeah, I think we kind of, as Texans, we kind of get a little too Texanized sometimes. But I think there's something to be said in this state about having those ties and having that background. Like the THSCA, and I say this with all due respect, is a mafia, right? They run this state at the high school level and who you get to recruit and how you get in those rooms. And we've seen coaches get fired because they've soured at that level. I mean, Tom Herman at Texas, right? I mean, a lot of that wasn't on-field success or not success. A lot of that was relationship building behind the scenes. I think you've seen a Sonny Dykes, you've seen a Joey McGuire, you've seen a Jeff Traylor, and their ability to get in those rooms and be with those power brokers and be with those bosses and kind of get, I don't think they send guys their way, but, when a kid's making a decision and you've known one coach for 30 years and you've only known the other coach for 3 months, I think it's natural for the high school head coach to go, hey, I know that guy and I can trust that guy and I know what he's telling me is true. And that goes a long way in the state. And I think coaches from the outside have to play catch up with that.
Mike, as you know, Dave Aranda came in after being a part of that national championship team, 2-7, then 12-2, where they were really good. And then all of a sudden last year they took a step back at 6-7. Your thoughts about how Baylor has handled recruiting? Obviously, Tech has a lot from the staff that was left over when Matt Rule left, and now they're in Lubbock. Some are still around at Baylor. Your thoughts about Dave Aranda and Baylor?
What I've always found fascinating about Dave Aranda is how self-reflective he is in an industry that doesn't have a lot of self-thinkers, right? Or at least ones that aren't going to admit it out loud to media. And when I went and sat down with Dave Aranda for the magazine interview, he was very open about how he didn't want to go into the transfer portal because he thought it was betraying the guys on his roster. And, he learned his lesson. They weren't very good. They lacked leadership. They just didn't replace some of those dudes from the leadership committee and just on the field as well. And, Mike Smith and those guys he's brought in defensively, I think is going to help. And, we spent a lot of time talking about Blake Shapen and the offense at Baylor, but for me, it's the defense. Like when, we can go back and look at the run in 2021, and they weren't outscoring teams, right? I mean, they were playing really low-scoring, close games, and they were winning with toughness and defense. They got away from that last year. If they can be better defensively, I think they're going to be really good again.
Mike, you talked to, hundreds of coaches, maybe even thousands at this point. Just kind of seeing the people who have revolved in and around here in Waco in the last few years. Dave Aranda is certainly very unique. How unique do you find him in comparison to, the various other coaches at all levels you've talked with over the years?
Dave Aranda is the most unique football mind I've ever been around. He's just, most head coaches, especially once you get like coordinator, head coach, a lot of them are the same type of dude, right? They were a very popular high school kid. They were probably a really good football player, probably never struggled to have a girlfriend or to be the popular kid or have a bunch of friends. I remember the first time I was sitting with Dave Aranda, he told me his nickname as a kid was Fence Post because he just stood there.
Yep.
And that's not normal for a guy leading a program. And so, when I talked to him this year for the magazine, we probably sat down for like 45 minutes. The first 15 minutes was about Indiana Jones. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Kind of like what he learned from the movie and what he liked from it, and not getting caught up in the glitz and glamour of the sword tricks and remembering you got a gun in your pocket and just being that team, right? And then he talked about building bridges between love and truth and how he starts with the love and he knows he needs to get to truth, and that's what he did with the transfer portal. Just stuff like that. They're like, Sark doesn't talk that way. Jimbo doesn't talk that way. And so I find them very interesting, but I'm a nerd who likes writing and philosophy, so I'm right up his alley. I'm a mark for Dave Aranda. I love him because of that.
I've admitted this on the show. The first time I interviewed him was the day he was introduced at Baylor at McLean Stadium, and I enjoyed it. It was more of an introduction. But after that, when I had a chance to sit down with him on one-on-ones, man, I had to always have one or two something different, unique, and I had to kind of study to make sure it was something he might have said before. Not really getting him to repeat anything, but knowing what his interest and hobbies might be.
Yeah, and I kind of had that same thing. Like, we kind of get these 30-minute windows, and last year was my first year to go do it. And, I usually kind of text coaches I know. Like, I know Sean Bell pretty well. I know Joey McGuire pretty well and some guys that were on the staff. And so, I was like, hey, what's Aranda into? Like, just to break the ice. Like, what are his interests or whatever? And Joey was like, he likes boxing. He likes fighting and stuff. And so that was the first question I asked him. I was like, hey, I heard you're into boxing. Who was your favorite boxer growing up? Well, that took up half of my window.
Yeah.
And I still had a lot of football questions. I just thought it was like a conversation starter, but he's just interested. He's just going to talk for a long time. So you almost have to like cut him off sometimes and be like, hey, coach, I'm sorry, I just don't want to take up too much of your time. Like, who's your linebacker going to be? And so it's just different because with most other coaches, they don't want the small talk. They want to talk about their offensive line or the defensive line or the linebacker. And, Aranda would rather talk to you about what book he's read recently. And I find it refreshing, but I can see how it couldn't, it's not everybody's cup of tea, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, you ask the right 4 questions that can take up a media session. Just 4 questions, depending on, what ones you ask. By the way, who did he say his favorite fighter was?
Pernell Whitaker, which I did not find surprising. A defensive wizard, right? Mm-hmm. More of a thinking man's boxer than a big man.
Yeah, not a guy that was known. He knocked some people out because he was elite, but yeah, that's pretty cool. Pernell Whitaker was a heck of a fighter, man. He had great quick hands too. Mike, when you see a team in Texas and you see what UTSA's done with Jeff Traylor, and they have Houston early this year, and they – of course, we just read off something from Max Olson, theathletic.com, about how they were the 95th ranked recruiting class in 2019, and if they redid them, they would be like in the top 20. Your thoughts about what he continues to do, even though he lost the wide receiver to the transfer portal?
Yeah, I mean, first off, I as a former recruiting guy, I would say never pay attention to rankings past about 30. Right. I mean, like there's enough guys to do the Power 5 teams and those like big elite teams, and they don't, after that, it's kind of a crapshoot. But I think what Jeff Traylor's done And a lot of those guys were Frank Wilson's players. Like Frank Harris and Sarah McCormick, Rashad Wisdom. He inherited those guys. And what I find the most impressive about Jeff Traylor and UTSA right now is they're keeping those dudes there.
Mm-hmm.
Like Frank Harris has stayed at UTSA. Rashad Wisdom stayed at UTSA. Most of until they lost Dakari Franklin this year to Ole Miss, that's the first time that they've had a player leave UTSA for a P5 program. During the portal era, while winning, I think 24 games over the last 2 years, 23 games over the last 2 years. So kids like to play there. They like to play for him. He's still recruiting really well. I'd imagine, and I'm a UTSA grad, so I say this, I'd imagine we're on borrowed time, right? Like he's going to get a big time job sooner or later, whether it's A&M or Texas or Houston or, whoever opens up next in the state. I'd imagine he's on the very short list to get an interview there.
Yeah, and they've done everything they can. They've tried to upgrade in certain things, but there's still some things that there's just certain things they cannot do, compared to those who have the unlimited budget, unlimited donor money. So I'm going to name a school in Texas. You tell me what first comes to your mind. We'll go over like 5 schools. Dana Holgorsen, Houston.
Trouble. It feels like he was hired to put Houston in the position to win in year one, or at least like do more than just try to get to a bowl game. But when you're around that roster, you kind of look at it, you see how many guys are coming in June. It doesn't feel like, it feels like they're more likely to be 4-8 than 8-4. And for me, going into year, I believe 5 for Holgorsen. That's not where they thought that they would be. And so, it feels like one of those years that they're gonna struggle, take their lumps, and it'll be interesting to see what happens beyond that.
Since I brought up UTSA, a guy that played for Jeff Traylor, who's kind of an up-and-coming young coach, Texas State, and G.J. Kinney.
Yeah, I think he's a really smart guy. I think he's an up-and-comer is a great way to put that. He's going to have success at Texas State and probably go, be a coach elsewhere. When I think that's one of the things I like the most about my job is I kind of get to sit in front of these guys and, guess which ones are going to be kind of big and which ones are going to fail in my own head. And, G.J. Kinney, feels like a dude who's going to have a lot of success. What he did at UIW was great. And he's, like you said, a Jeff Traylor protege who kind of carries himself in that same way. He's going to do really well at Texas State.
All right. Rapid fire. Texas. Sarkisian in Texas.
Maturity. I feel like the only thing that can slow down Texas is themselves. And if they can be mature in the quarterback room and as a head coach, I think that they're going to win the Big 12.
Jimbo and A&M.
Ooh, disaster maybe. Like that just feels like trouble waiting to happen. Like, 20-13, the offense is struggling. They're losing to Ole Miss. Like what happens between him and Bobby Petrino?
TCU, the year after with Sonny Dykes.
I guess I would say step back. It's inevitable that they're going to take a step back. It's just going to be interesting to see how far of a step back. If they go back to 9-3 or 8-4, I think that's seen as fine. If they drop down to like 6-6, 5-7, I think there's going to be question marks.
Texas Tech, you kind of mentioned Joey earlier, but there's a lot high expectations at 8-5. They won a lot at the end. Shuck is back, and they've kind of built a pretty good roster.
Yeah, I would say hype. Joey's really good at build it. He knows how to talk to people. He'd be a tremendous politician. Y'all know him well there. He's got a lot of momentum. They're talking about Micah Hudson maybe committing to Texas Tech. And so, the momentum and the hype is real, and we're going to find out if it can match that on the field for a second straight year. All
right, Dave Aranda coming off 6-7 after 12-2.
Yeah, roller coaster is the way I've been describing it, right? Like, I don't know what the Baylor program is under Dave Aranda. Is it closer to that 12-2 team? Is it closer to the 2 losing seasons? I think it's closer to 12-2. I think it's more of an 8-4, 9-3 type program if he can get it figured out. But, I don't know. Y'all would be better off to tell me what happens if this team goes 6-6 or 5-7, So it's just kind of weird we're having these conversations, an off season after – saying Aranda was like going to go get, like the Oklahoma job or something like that. Right. And so it's a very interesting time in Waco for sure.
It'll be fun to watch because I think anytime they seem to be like picked down, they go up. And when you have something to follow it up. I want to mention Rhett Lashley and also SMU.
Yeah, I think they're on the cusp. I think with the American being what it is now, with the best 4 teams, leaving for the Big 12, the best 3 teams leaving for the Big 12. If you look at their schedule, they don't play Tulane or UTSA in the regular season. It feels like they're right on the cusp to win 10 games and win an AAC championship and maybe be, the best G5 team in America.
And finally, North Texas. And obviously the first-year head coach there in Eric Morris.
Yeah, I'm excited about watching what North Texas is going to do under Eric Morris. Now you look at Incarnate Word and San Antonio and think of it as a really good FCS program, but it was bad. I mean, it was like Lamar and Beaumont bad job when Eric Morris took that over and turned it around. I think as a head coach, he's been excellent. North Texas has a lot of resources and facilities. I think it's only a matter of time before they get up to UTSA's level, to be honest with you.
Mike, I'm proud of you, man. Great stuff with what you're doing at the magazine for TexasFootball.com, and congratulations on the role you're at. Thank you for your time.
Appreciate y'all guys. See you Big 12 Media Days.
Mike Craven, Dave Campbell's Texas Football Magazine senior writer. It's 5:34.